Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started on time today. Thank you all for being here. I would like to take the distinct pleasure of calling the first regular working meeting of the Workforce Housing Committee to order. We're going to go through roll call in just a moment, but I wanted the minutes to reflect that Arnold Urias and David Rowe are excused. All right, Mr. Mike Fan.
Present.
Randy Goodman.
Here.
Nicole Kennedy.
Here.
And John Rocha.
Here.
Wonderful. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Teeters.
Here.
He is here. Let the record reflect. All right. We're on item number 3 on the agenda, discussion and action items. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to make a quick housekeeping note that we are reordering the agenda to accommodate our speakers before the other discussion items. So agenda item D is going to be above agenda item C. So we'll receive presentations from our local stakeholders right after the approval of the minutes. But prior to that, it is time to consider a chair and a vice chair. So how we'll work it is I'll call for a nomination for a chair and we'll put it to a vote. And then the appointed chair will call for the nomination of the vice chair and we'll put it to a vote. So for starters, I hope everybody had a time to consider each other and in advance of this agenda item. And I am going to officially call for a nomination for the chair position of the committee. Do I hear any nominations?
Mike.
I hear 2 nominations from Randy and from Nicole for Mr. Mike Fan to be chair. Are there any other nominations?
I nominate Mike Fan as well.
Okay, there are 3 nominations for Mr. Mike Fan. Any other nominations? All right, I'll close the nominations, and I would like to call for a motion to approve Mr. Mike Fan as...
Don't I have a say in this at all?
This is a voluntold situation, apparently. You're outnumbered. So with no further questions or nominations, I'd like to call for the vote to appoint Mr. Mike Fan as chair.
Can I will say I'm going to miss the July meeting and the September meeting both. And because of my other commitments, I'll need a strong vice chair. So if that's okay with you guys, then it's okay with me.
Fabulous. And I think before we call for the official vote, you need to accept the nomination.
All right, thank you, I accept.
Fabulous. So can I hear a motion to approve Mr. Mike Fan as the chair?
I'll motion to approve Mike.
Wonderful. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Tony Teeters, thank you so much. And a vote, please. A show of hands is fine. Wonderful. Okay, that's 4, and obviously Mike abstained.
Your hand up there.
Fabulous. So, Mike, for the rest of the proceedings, I'm going to turn it over to you as chair, and your first official action is to call for a nomination of the vice chair.
Okay, I'll call for a nomination of the vice chair. Who wants it?
Somebody who's in maybe Switzerland.
David will be watching.
The rule of any
this later.
volunteer position, never meet.
All right. Without any nominations, you can choose to nominate someone.
Nicole, are you willing to do it?
I'm willing. The only thing is I'm also gone in July, so I know that we're not able to call in, which is very disappointing.
Yeah. Thank you. So,
Deterrent.
yeah.
John, are you here July and September by chance?
Yes. Actually, September meeting is the only one that I had to check on. What's the September meeting?
September 6th.
September 6th.
Yes, I can make that meeting.
I'm hearing
Are you
nomination.
interested?
I'm sure, yeah.
Is that okay with everybody else? That sound okay?
All right, we'll call for an official motion.
All motion.
Thank you, Nicole. Second?
Second.
Fabulous. All those in favor? Show of
Aye.
hands or aye? Wonderful. Okay. Mr. Chair, we are ready to go to the next agenda item, and that is the approval, agenda item 3B, approval of the May 31st minutes. And if I could, please, sir, just make a quick note about the minutes. So in the future, the minutes are long. They captured a lot of the dialogue for the committee. Just so you're aware, in the future, we're going to go to a summary of the minutes where we capture just a paraphrase of the discussion, any important points, and then capture the actual action taken by the committee. So in the future, the minutes won't be so long, but wanted to call that out so the expectation isn't for that in the future.
Okay, thank you. So are there any comments regarding the minutes? I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I'll motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye.
Great.
Chelsea, just to be clear, I have to abstain from all.
Correct. You are a non-voting member as a liaison. Yes. Thank you. Okay. At this time, we are ready, sir, for item 3D, which has been moved out of order to go right after the approval of the minutes. We're ready to receive presentations from our local stakeholders. First up is Deborah with our Dignity Health YRMC. And as she gets up, I'll just ping our IT folks to switch PowerPoint presentations to the YRMC one in the folder. But just so the committee is aware, we heard you loud and clear last week, and thank you. We're doing our best to gather information and data. And these presentations, we have 4 for you. First up will be YRMC, and this will, once they have it loaded, hit the down button. We'll have Deborah speak, and then we will have our Mr. Clark Tenney, our PUSD superintendent, speak, then Fire Chief Holger and Brandon Nunez. So without further ado, if you wouldn't mind, I know.
Thank you. Good morning, committee. Thank you so much for having us here at Dignity Health YRMC to talk further around workforce housing. As you all know, this is a very important issue, not only for us as a health system here in this community, but also for others in that public service sector. So thank you so much for having us. So first, what I wanted to do is really just give you some additional background regarding the healthcare shortage that we currently face nationally as well as within the state of Arizona. So the U.S. faces a shortfall of between 37,000 and 124,000 physicians by the year 2034. And then additionally, that the current workforce that we have from a physician complement is aging. And more than 2 of every 5 active physicians in the U.S. will be 65 years or older within the next decade. So their retirement plans are going to dramatically affect the magnitude of our national workforce shortage. Additionally, looking at rural communities versus those that are more urbanized, if those minority populations living in those rural communities and those that don't have insurance had that same healthcare use patterns as populations with fewer barriers to healthcare, up to an additional 180,000 physicians would be needed currently. And so I think you're looking at this community. Currently, it is underserved. A rural community is underserved, and that would actually drive up that demand even more. So from a nursing standpoint, nationally, the supply of nurses decreased by more than 100,000 from the year 2020 to 2021, and that was in the thick of COVID, as you all know. And that was the largest drop ever observed over the past 4 decades. The majority of these nurses were age 35 or lower, and they primarily worked in hospital systems. And that's significant to point out because typically what we see is RNs staying in that career path, 60s, 70s, retiring. So they are coming in, going to school and then going and working in that career field, not for very long. And so if that continues, that is going to just continually to, exacerbate that problem and drive that demand even higher. And then on the contrary, we are seeing only a slight decrease in those nurses retiring at age 60 or 70. So not a lot of movement on retirement early or any of those things, which is good. Recent survey findings predict that the U.S. could see a shortfall of 200 to 450,000 nurses available for direct patient care, which is what we talk about in our hospitals by the year 2025. So that is a significant shortage. Let me move to this. Then looking at our state and how we are currently ranking from a healthcare provider perspective, we meet just 39% of that primary care. So primary care is family medicine and internal medicine physician need. So that current demand is 560 of those physicians with an additional almost 2,000 by the year 2030. We rank 42nd out of 50 states in total PCP. The need is 80.2 per thousand population. And then we rank 31st in total active physicians, 252 per thousand population. And we are one of the fastest growing states, and we're also an aging state. So that's just going to continue to increase that demand. Some of the things that Dignity Health is doing is we are increasing our academic, initiatives. So we already have existing residency programs in Phoenix in our collaboration with Valleywise and Creighton University School of Medicine out of Omaha for medical student schooling. And then additional to that, we already had some residency programs for family medicine and general surgery. And then in our East Valley facilities, we are starting residency programs in family medicine, internal medicine, emergency medicine, and general surgery this year. So we have those residents coming in July, and then we have OBGYN residents starting next July. So looking forward to 2028, we're going to have a total of 128 additional physicians that are trained to serve in Phoenix and within Dignity Health facilities. The goal is to really create that pipeline so we have that retention opportunity to keep them within our facilities, to keep them within Arizona. And then on the nursing side, we have partnerships and collaboration with the colleges in Phoenix as well as here to hire those nursing students when they graduate. And then we also offer facilities for rotations, for clinicals, and those kinds of things. So that's how we are currently addressing these shortages. And then when we look at the complication of workforce housing, when we're trying to recruit and retain these residents or these nurses, and I'll show you that here in a minute, makes it very challenging for us, right? It's already very competitive to recruit nurses, and then when we don't have homes or adequate housing that's priced appropriately for their salaries, it really makes it hard to bring them into these communities. Let's see. There we go. Oops. I think I went one too far. So I wanted just to give you a couple testimonies of what we've heard from some of our nurses as we've tried to recruit them. After I've learned the stipend was taxed so high, I began looking for housing and I was unable to find something adequate for my entire family. I apologize again for not notifying you sooner. I won't be able to travel at this time. And that was from a seasonal emergency room RN that we were trying to recruit here. And I can give you a little context on that stipend. So one of the tools we have in our toolbox is to be able to provide traveling nurses a stipend to come and work here, and this to fill that gap. However, that stipend is taxed very high, 40%. So when you look at it, there really isn't a lot there to help us bridge that gap for those nurses. Another testimony, I'm really sorry, but I've been looking for places to rent, and it's just too expensive in relation to what I'd be making hourly there. I really appreciate the patience you've had and hope you keep me in mind if more of my experience could be considered at a future time. I truly appreciate all you've done. Yes, home is big enough for my family, or $2,500 a month. I just wouldn't be able to keep up. And that's the thing is we don't want anyone to be house poor. We really want to be able to keep that debt to income ratio within, a manageable percentage. Another situation we have within our existing staff is we have people that commute from out of town. So they're commuting from North Phoenix into Prescott every single day. That is 164 miles round trip or 3 hours daily in the car. When they were looking for homes, there was a $500 difference in between rental home prices in Phoenix as well as in Prescott Valley. So they were looking at a $2,200 three-bed, three-bath with a pool versus a $2,850 for an outdated 1960 rental that had, significant pages of inspection reports that needed to get fixed. So they had to go down and live in Phoenix, and now they're forced to commute every single day. I can only tell you, you can imagine the impact this has on your personal life, as well as, just the work stress, having to know that you have to commute back and forth every day, and just the demand of working in healthcare these past few years. Our staff has a desire to plant roots and contribute to that community where we live, where we work, but they just can't afford the long-term commute, and it's just not sustainable. And so looking at some of the impacts we felt as an organization with these workforce shortages and the housing challenges is our nutrition services have been impacted. We've had to reduce hours of operations in our cafeteria, so no night shift services. So people that are working in the ED or on the floors, they don't have anything available to eat. So they're even having to pack a lunch or have a loved one maybe bring them something. They can't, run down and get a cup of coffee if they want to. We have our brand new outpatient services building. We built a cafe in there. We have not been able to open it because we have not had any staffing in order to open that. And we really wanted that to be an area for the patients to come while they're receiving their care, maybe have coffee or, and mingle and have a nice healthcare environment where they can spend some time. Additionally, the laboratory, we have outpatient lab stations. Unfortunately, we've had to close those that are off hospital campus, forcing patients to come down to our hospitals in order to receive those lab draws, where we really want to be able to meet patients where they live and have services that are located off the hospital campus so that it is convenient for them. And then I think everyone is kind of familiar at this point, post-COVID, the traveling nurses and how we use them in our facilities to really bridge that gap for those nurses that we aren't able to employ directly. And the impact with traveling nurses is that they have this, as a short-term mindset. I'm only here for 12 to 16 weeks. And they're not really dedicated to making change or really improving some things. It's lack of consistent staff to standardize those processes and hardwire those patient-related tasks that we need. As I mentioned, 12 to 16 weeks, we turn over a group. And so we have learning curves regarding EMRs and processes. We're constantly having to retrain. So that's a challenge operationally. And then this is a significant stat too. So our St. Joe's Hospital in Phoenix is really, a flagship hospital. It's a trauma center. We do transplants there. It's clinically very advanced. And we have our Yavapai facility here. Yavapai has more traveling nurses than St. Joe's does, and it's 1/4 of the size. And that's 4 times the cost at Yavapai than we have at St. Joe's due to the shortage of nurses that we're experiencing here. Just wanted to give you that level set of kind of what we're seeing from a healthcare shortage and what we're hearing from our patients or from our staff, and then how that is impacting us from a service delivery standpoint. I know, Chelsea, you had sent over some questions you would like for us to address too, and I'll get into those as well. But do you guys have any questions for me on that material before I move on?
I guess the only one to keep me from writing too many notes, can we have this PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, I think you have a copy, right, Chelsea? Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Good,
Yeah.
thank you.
And afterwards, if you guys have any additional questions for us, please, Chelsea has our contact information, happy to, address any additional questions that may come up after today. So one of the questions was, how many units do we need now and how many will we need in the foreseeable future? This is really, it's varied, right, based on how many positions we have open. We've done some internal analyses based on our open positions, how large our families are that are currently working for us, and just made some kind of rough assumptions around what that need is going to be currently. And then, of course, in the future, that's going to vary as well. But this is what we kind of see as that mix. And, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, really it's going to be dependent on what the staffing is wanting, right? Because we don't know exactly. And I have a slide later on that talks about how we can maybe get a better understanding of that. This is where we feel our need is now, though.
Can I ask a good question?
Absolutely.
In the past, has the hospital up here, when you accommodate for the traveling nurses, are there living situation completely left on them, or has the hospital ever considered some kind of a working relationship with the hotel? Because I know, having been involved in so many economic development groups over the years, one of the issues with the hotels is getting people in there Monday through Friday. Has that ever been talked about? At a
Yes.
reduced rate, obviously?
Yes, we do have that currently, and that was, I think, one of the questions too. Do we have any thoughts on short-term rentals? And that is something that we're doing, is using our local hotels to help put up some of these traveling nurses.
okay. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, great question. Of course, if you guys have any additional ideas that we should tap into, please let us know, because we're always looking for new and inventive ways to make sure that we have housing for our staff.
And your numbers, just, I'm assuming these numbers that you have on that prior slide are based on your permanent staffing that you're looking to hire, not the traveling nurses.
Exactly. Yeah, this is for our permanent staff. We're very limited on some of the data we can pull for our staff just because it is protected. So this is right now really, the best analysis we were able to perform internally on kind of what that need is. So the demographics of people needing homes are really, it's our middle income earners are essential service providers, all levels, from staff, lab technicians, our surgical technicians, our nurses, which I know we've been talking about a lot, as well as our physicians, right? Physicians do tend to have a higher salary, but there still are very limited, even supply of those houses even at a higher price point. And just some of the kind of the breakdown, again, this is our existing employee data that we're looking at. The bulk of it is employee only, so the single person looking for a home. And then the next largest category is really this employee, one adult, like a spouse, and then a child. And then, just the percentages, reduced from there. As far as rental and ownership solutions, so as we talked about previously, we do have our traveling nurses at some local hotels. We want to look at priority lease arrangements with existing apartment complexes. So if there's an apartment complex that knows we're going to have a unit coming up for availability, could they reach out to us first? We can pull our staff, or if we know we have a traveler coming in, we can then make arrangements to have, see, is that staff person interested in it? Or could we put our nurse in there so they're not living in that hotel, and just try to get them more stabilized in that community? And then ideally, we'd like to be able to offer that at a discounted rate to our employees. There is some challenges there we're working with too on how we would do that with the employee. So we're still investigating that. And then it wouldn't be our preference to actually own a residential development. We are definitely open to exploring what that would look like, and maybe a co-ownership with fire, police, or the school district. We are not experts in residential homes. We are experts in healthcare and building medical office buildings and building hospitals. But I think we all want to contribute to an end solution. So we'd be willing to look at any ideas or co-ownerships that might come up during this workforce, or this committee. And we don't currently offer any employee housing programs within Common Spirit. We've pulled internally, and we have not found anything that is being offered today. I think, like us, a lot of our markets are working on it. We just have not identified any solutions yet that we can leverage across the system. And then I also wanted to bring up some additional considerations. You guys may already have some of these on your agenda from previous discussions, but looking for flexible planning and zoning processes that speed to market, trying to get, the biggest problem we have is the supply is just not there. And we all know real estate and building is not an immediate thing. So trying to expedite that process and make it as efficient as possible. Some things that I've heard of that other cities in Arizona are doing is raising funds to help fill financial gaps. So for example, this one city is using 50% of certain permitting fees for certain projects that are paid to the city. They put that into an affordable housing fund, and then that housing fund is then used to redevelop and create housing units. And so far they've raised $6 million and created 100 housing units to this cause. As I mentioned before, we're not a residential home expert or workforce housing expert. Thought maybe we could hire a planner with expertise in attainable housing and how we could all work together as a community to understand that more, bring in different ideas in how we could achieve additional housing. Look to the city to see if are there any buildings or developments that are abandoned that we could maybe tap into and really do some revitalization efforts and bring some additional units. Those aren't large scale, but I think any little bit happens, and it also benefits the community too, because you're revitalizing and re-energizing some of these neighborhoods. Increase attractiveness to developers and keep costs down by waiving taxes and impact fees for development. Again, part of this is making sure that these are going to stay affordable and they're not going to, we're going to do this and then we're going to just come on at market price. So having that agreement in place that if we're offering these to you, they will be kept under a certain dollar amount or percentage or, whatever the economics work out to be on that. And then I thought, we've done some of our internal analysis. It is somewhat limited, but I thought we could work together and develop a standardized survey to further understand really what is that demand? What are staff looking for? Is it the single family? Is it multifamily? Are they looking for townhomes? Like, what is that mix? We've taken our, our best kind of analysis at what we think, but I think if we could create a survey and really get it out broadly and understand collectively what that demand is, I think that would really help us kind of understand what we're tracking towards. And then that's all I have. Do you guys have any other questions from us, Dignity Health?
Yes, I'm sure we will as we move forward. So we would appreciate seeing that so that we have all that data available to us. Is there a board, a local board, or a board at Dignity? Who would, if there is financial considerations and a partnership to enter into, who makes that decision?
That is a great question. So we have a committee that we've set up within Dignity Health. I lead that committee. Dr. Torres, our CEO, and Jeremy, who's here, our COO, also sits on that committee with our HR team. So we're really that first initial vetting process. Then we would get our real estate team involved, and then essentially, depending on what that looks like, our board would weigh in on that as well. So that would kind of be that first vetting process is our local Yavapai Workforce Housing Committee. If we look and think that that's worthwhile and it's going to meet our needs and everything, we would then bring in our real estate team to help us navigate that and probably answer additional questions that we just aren't equipped to handle as healthcare providers, since they have that real estate expertise. And then from there, we would bring that package forward to our Yavapai board.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And again, if anything comes forward, I'd be the contact to really review that with our team.
Curious, I have one more quick question, unless anyone else does. So just based on, your employee group in the Valley versus in Prescott area, clearly there's different price points as far as median home price in the Valley compared to here. Do you base some of your salary ranges on where they're actually physically located, or is it just based on experience?
That's a great question. So part of the work we're doing internally is looking at really how are we compensating our nurses specifically. That's where our greatest need is currently. And our HR team has done a thorough analysis of that compensation package and have recently brought them up to par with what we're paying our nurses in Phoenix. So that is something we've done. So now their pay is commensurate with what we're seeing from our nurses in Phoenix.
Can I ask a question also?
Yes.
If you went back to the board, would they consider possibly coming out of this group a suggestion on a process to get there through a fund manager, where you don't want to be landlords, and I totally understand that, but as a silent partnership with maybe 3 other entities and everybody pooling the resources to pay for this, but there is a structure I've done with my rentals, and it can be handled through a fund manager, and then you would obviously collect a certain amount of money that could be determined. But just doing some quick math on 150 homes at $150,000 each, it's $22,500,000. And if you divide that by 4, withholding costs, and we'll just use round numbers, it comes out to about $6 million times 4 entities.
Right.
And then what happens when you all collect the rent, that would go into a fund that would be managed by a fund manager and theoretically earn interest. to offset the payment, which would be, I just again calculated it. Let's say you could get a reduced rate at 4% for 14,000 each. That could pay. That's what your payment would be on 6 million, 14,000.
Right, exactly. I think we would definitely look at something like that as a co-ownership.
Correct.
And exactly what are the economics on that? I think that we don't want to be landlords. I'm sure we would hire a property manager to help us do all of that. And there's questions on the employee side.
Yeah,
that
you wouldn't have to really do anything. You would
Right.
be a silent partner,
Yeah.
if you will, and it can be structured legally and through contracts to alleviate the liability through setting up an LLC. But I think that's something that maybe our group could talk about as a suggestive way to get this done in terms of the stuff that we know just through our real estate holdings and things like that, because I think it can be done and alleviate you from the liability. But those numbers were just on 150 homes.
Yeah.
With, again, an estimated 150,000 per unit. But it could be, we could sit down and talk about that. I know we had a couple people here that were involved in the manufactured housing. What can you get for 150,000?
We're pretty, well, we'll have PUSD come in here, but we have housing for 150,000 and it's going to be at Taylor Hicks.
Yeah, okay,
Which I
great.
think you've seen at council.
Yeah, I have. I was there for the groundbreaking. It was great. But in terms of structuring, I think that's something maybe the group could just use as a suggestion of a way to get there for these entities to alleviate some of their concerns about liability. And we've got an attorney right here in our audience. We could talk about structure of contracts and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I had that on our slides too. I'm definitely think we're open to that co-ownership. I think that really understanding what that need is, because our biggest is we want to make sure that we're actually meeting that need. So if we're building 150 multifamily, is that really going to be what our staff is demanding and what our community is demanding? Or is it more of a mixed use where we have townhomes, multifamily, where maybe they could, have some transitional homes even within that community? I'm not sure exactly. We've talked a lot about that. And if we could get that greater understanding and say, here, we've done some homework and here's what we feel like that's going to need and this is what the economics look like, I definitely think that would be something that we would evaluate.
Well, even in our last meeting, we talked about, and I'm just going to use this term, sort of a good, better, best program where you would maybe start out at a rental and allow them in some structure to save up for a down payment, and then they move up to a starter home. And then, of course, you've got the high income earners like your doctors that, again, if we pool the effort, some of that could be explored.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Any additional questions?
Public questions. Can I ask a question, Mr. Chairman?
At the end of the meeting?
No, after each agenda item,
Okay.
but we can take.
Yes. I understand. We can take public comment as soon as we're done with questions. We can take public comment.
I thought you were finished. You finished. I had a question about the 120 to 150 units. It seemed to me that you were talking about.
Because we have this recorded, I'm going to have to ask you to speak into a microphone.
Okay. Regarding the 120, estimate 120 to 150 units, I think my understanding was you're talking about for new employees. And does that include cafe workers and clerical workers? And does it include it doesn't include existing employees who are stressed, who maybe are commuting 2 hours. It doesn't include those people who really need workforce housing that is closer or more affordable. If you include those people, what do you think the number would be as far as what the real need is for local workforce housing for those people?
I think that is our current need when you look at our open positions and the opportunity to fill those, as well as those existing staff that are commuting from Phoenix or that may be in a less than ideal situation. Current. Now, future is going to be a lot larger number, right? That is our immediate need today when you take those open positions as well as those staff that are in less than ideal living conditions.
So future, you mean by? So what would the number be in the future, and about how long is that from now?
I don't have that exact number because it's so complex, right? Based because our staffing is seasonal, and our open positions vary based on what we're seeing as an organization. I don't, not being a developer, I don't have that formulation on how to actually get there. I just know what our current demand is based on what we're seeing.
Okay, is that it? Oh, John's got a couple more.
Jump in there before Howard came in. Deborah, 2 quick questions for you. So is there any resistance internally versus, say, from your staff or any surveys Dignity has done to see if there's any resistance between renting and owning?
Not that I have seen, no, or any surveys, but I think, again, that would be something that we could pull even deeper to see. I think right now it's just been, I can't afford, whether that's a rental or a home purchase. And everyone's financials are a little bit differently in what they can afford and what their current existing debt is, and if they're able to afford, that down payment. So it's really just been focused around cost at this point, not the
Gotcha.
ability to pay.
So in your best opinion, if folks would find something affordable, just plainly because they can afford it based on their salary, hourly wage, whatever that is, that they would want to find housing here to continue employment with dignity?
That
That's
is
your
correct.
understanding? Okay.
Yeah, that's my understanding. We hear that all the time from, feedback from our staff is, I really want to work here. I love this community. I just cannot find anything that I can afford. So they go down to the valley, or they maybe they try to find a home, it's maybe in Chino Valley, and then even that commute is just hard for them, or the services in that community are what they need it to be for their family, and they just aren't able to stay with us long term.
Gotcha. Thank you. And one last thing, sorry. Employee housing. You mentioned you folks haven't gotten into employee housing. Can you share with the committee what the biggest hurdle has been of why that conversation's kind of died or not gone anywhere?
Well, I'll say we historically, as an organization, we don't have employee housing because it's never been a need before. But currently, for the last year and a half, it's been on everyone's radar. Here locally in Prescott, as well as across Common Spirit, it is something that we are currently addressing. We just have not identified the program and what's going to fit. And each market is a little bit different, right? So what Prescott needs is going to be different than what we're seeing in Omaha, Nebraska. So, but I know as a healthcare organization, we are taking workforce housing very seriously, and we do have committees working on that at the national level, and then us here, of course, working locally.
Awesome. Thank you. That's it. Appreciate it, Mike.
Okay, anything else from the committee? Anything else from the audience? Deborah, thank you so very much.
Thank you all for
Very
your time. I
helpful.
appreciate it.
Mr. Tenney?
So thank you for inviting me here this morning, and I want to thank each of you as well for being willing to serve on this committee. This is great. I serve as the council liaison on a couple of committees, and I know the pay is not great, but there's so much power and fame that comes with this that probably offsets that. No, this is truly an act of altruism on your part, each of you, and I appreciate the experience and the heart that you bring to this. It's a major issue in our community, has been for the last few years, and I really am gratified that the city is trying to get their arms around a little bit and has reached out to experts in our area to help us with this. So thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that. I could pretty much just say, Deborah's presentation, insert the word teacher for nurse and sit down. It's very, very, very similar. But I'll give you, almost cleared my throat into the microphone. That wouldn't be good. I'll give you a little bit of background where we're at. I'll try to be brief and then mostly takes questions if that's all right. So we're in a real similar situation with employees of all kinds, but particularly teachers. We're really not in a position where we're recruiting anyone other than our certified staff. That's our teachers, our speech language therapists, occupational therapists, principals, et cetera, from out of town. We're not in a position to pay nearly enough to recruit somebody to attract somebody to come to Prescott to be a secretary or a bus driver or something like that. So we're mostly looking as far as our recruiting needs at our certified staff, we call them, those who require a certification. And I'll just clarify there really quick. Because we're a district school, all of our teachers and most of those other job categories that I mentioned do require a certificate from the state, a certain level of education, usually about 5 years of education and specific training, et cetera. If we were a charter school, there is no such standard for that. We could, go to the local bank and hire a bank teller, or find somebody out of the line at Safeway, or somebody on the street who looks smart or whatnot, and hire them. But we need to hire a specific type of person, and because of that, the pool for those folks is limited. It's limited nationwide. It's hard to be a teacher, period. It's always been hard to be a teacher. It's a really challenging, complex job. It's rewarding in a lot of ways, but difficult in a lot of ways. As well, with the political climate in the United States, people are less enthusiastic about becoming teachers. They're not super well compensated to begin with, and there's a lot of people who have flown on a plane before. They've been students in school, their kids have been students in school, so they're pretty sure they know how to fly the plane. They know how to be a teacher, they know how to run a school district or whatnot. And there's a lot of that comes to us, and so it's less attractive to be a teacher all the time. So that's kind of the scenario that we're working with, the context that we're working with. In Arizona, you probably are aware that our per student funding of schools, of public schools in Arizona is out of the 50 states and the District of Columbia, we're 51st. Our legislature has chosen to fund us at that level, so we're not able to pay teachers really well. So we're really kind of in a recruiting and retention pinch to begin with. Fortunately, we're in Prescott. But also, unfortunately, we're in Prescott. People want to come to Prescott because it's a terrific place to be, right? There's pine trees and lakes. You've seen those around. And people are nice and friendly, and the weather is great. And we've got a very successful school district. We're in the top about 20% of the state in terms of our test scores. And we've got a great reputation for being a good place to work, et cetera. So that's good, but it's just not affordable for people increasingly. So our teachers who are coming just to us out of college make about $51,000 a year. Our higher end teachers who have moved up the salary scale over the years and been with us for a very long time might make as much as $70,000 a year. That doesn't make a real big dent into the median home price in Prescott of $604,000. And it's not much better in Prescott Valley or Chino Valley, as you know. So particularly over the last several years, we've had a difficult time attracting people. Once people get established and they find something that works for them, an apartment or a home, or they make a connection, or they've built up a little equity over the years, et cetera, we tend to retain people fairly well. We're great retention-wise. I was mentioning the broader context of recruiting in Arizona and how much teachers are paid. There's a professional organization of what's it called, the Arizona School Personnel Administrators Association. They do a survey twice a year on staffing in schools, and as of January of this year was the most recent one they did. In the middle of the school year, there were over 2,000 unfilled teaching positions in Arizona. Fortunately, in PUSD, we had none that were unfilled at that time. We're a lot better off than a lot of folks for the reasons that I mentioned, but it's difficult to attract people sometimes. Well, let's put it this way. It's not difficult to attract people. It's difficult to get people to land here sometimes because of housing prices. So I'll give you a couple of real quick examples. Just in the last 3 weeks, we've had 2 different teachers who have applied for a position and said, oh, that's fantastic. I've always wanted to be a math teacher at Mile High Middle School. And we're getting ready to move here, and called me back up a few days later and said, holy smokes. Again, insert teacher for nurse, the quotes that you saw up there earlier. We can't make this work. I can't find anything. I can't even find an apartment that's affordable for us, and we don't see ourselves living in an apartment long term. I can live in the valley for 20% less and make about 15% more, because those communities down there will tax themselves with a budget override, it's called, and our community has chosen not to do that for the last several years. So they can make more down there and pay less down there, and it's just harder for us to get people. Had another person who actually signed a contract with us and was legally bound to us, just like we were legally bound to them for the next year, and about a week later got back with me and said, we can't do it. The housing is way too expensive. We talked with them about the plan that we've got for teacher housing, but it won't be completely ready till September-ish. And they said that we can't fill that gap. There's no way we can do that. I'm sorry. We're going to have to back out of the contract. We let the person out of the contract, but that's pretty common. On the other hand, we did have a success with this. You probably know we're looking at teacher housing, and I'll give you a little bit more information about that to the extent that you're interested. But We haven't been using that as a recruiting tool this summer. We'll use that going forward, not knowing exactly when it will be ready. Sometime between late July and early September is what we're targeting and hopeful for. Our school year starts in late July, so we haven't been able to tell people, yeah, if you'll come work with us, you can't find housing, no problem, because you can, Exhibit A right here. Instead, as people have said, hey, do you have any ideas about housing? I've talked about several options, including we will have something available probably September at the latest. And one of the issues we've had recruiting in our district is occupational therapists. We're required by law to provide occupational therapy to several students who have special education, individual education plans. At any rate, if we hire an occupational therapist, it costs us about $100,000, but we haven't been able to hire occupational therapists. Last 2 years, we've had 2 folks on contract. And when we contract with an agency to bring in an occupational therapist, it costs us about $125,000 to do that. I don't know what your organizations are like, but our organization does not have $25,000 to spare when we need it. So we did have a success recently, occupational therapist moving from New Hampshire, I think. Super excited to be here in Prescott, has always wanted to be here, and signed a contract and called me up a week later and said, holy smokes, I'm not sure if I can do this. Does this sound familiar? I'm not sure if I can do this. Housing is so expensive. And I mentioned, well, one option is this. She said, oh, that's great. I can do an Airbnb for 2 months if that's going to be available. So we specifically got this person because we will have the housing available. So that's good news going forward. We know it'll be a great recruiting and retention tool for us. Let's see. One of the questions that people have asked, so we're looking at building teacher housing. One of the questions that people have asked is, wait a minute, why are you doing that? Why don't you just pay teachers enough? Well, I've kind of mentioned the broader context for that, right, in terms of the funding. We are looking at building some small teacher homes I've talked about, and I'll give you more details in just a moment. We're looking at renting them at $1,200, which is roughly half of market value. Some people said, just pay teachers enough to get something on the market. Well, that's an additional $1,200. And if we do $1,200 times 12 months times the 240 certified employees we have, comes out to about another $3.5 million every single year that we would need to get from the state. If somebody can convince the state to give us another $3.5 million every year, absolutely. I'm putting that money directly into teachers' pockets, and they can all afford to get something low end in our current market. But short of that, we're looking at other solutions. And one of the solutions we found is this. The state of Arizona has statutes that allow school districts to build teacherages, they're called, teacher housing. And multiple districts throughout Arizona have already done this. It's common in other parts of the United States as well. Mostly the districts that have done this are places where the housing stock, just period, straight up, any kind of housing is very limited. Out on the Indian reservations or in southern Arizona, rural areas, et cetera. There haven't been a lot of places like Prescott where there are lots of homes, just the homes are simply unaffordable. Turns out our available housing stock is quite low here as well. I'm sure you've seen data or will see data on that as well. But at any rate, very little in terms of affordable housing. So we've looked at that as an option. There was a grant from the federal government through the state government that is available to Yavapai County and Coconino County of up to $500,000 if a school district would match it to build homes for teachers. Chino Valley School District has taken advantage of this, Sedona here locally as well, and we were awarded a $500,000 grant. We looked at different options and went out to bid for 6 homes to be built on the back corner of our Taylor Hicks Elementary School property. They look like this. Turns out that the company that won the bid is led by one of your committee members here, and it's been really a pleasure to work with Mr. Rocha on that. That's been a blessing to our school district. We're looking at building roughly 900 square foot homes. I think they're 896 square feet. John, is that right? 6 of them on the back corner of the campus. Like I say, right now, most of the area that will be covered is a gravel lot that's used by teenagers to make poor decisions on the weekend. So we're hopefully going to eliminate that issue, in addition to taking a small bite out of what we need. There'll be 6 homes total. 4 of them will be available for our teachers as a recruiting tool. We'll lease them for a year, allow people to get established. So instead of having several days to find housing after they say, oh, Prescott, I'm so glad I finally found a job there, they'll have several months to land here and find something that works for them. We have 470 roughly full-time employees, and all of them have found some place in Prescott. So it's not like it's impossible for anybody to live in Prescott. Ultimately, people are able to do that, but they're not able to do it in 10 days, which is what they often have to find housing. So this will allow people to land here in Prescott. Here is, I'm not sure if you can see this, and I'm happy to pass these around if you'd like kind of an overview of how the houses will be placed. There'll be a fire access lane, et cetera. 2 of the homes we're setting aside for the city, so we're entering into an intergovernmental agreement with the city. I've already talked with them on a number of levels, and I think it's coming to Council, Chelsea, okay, the 13th, June 13th, and we'll see if the city council is interested in the IGA that's been drafted by the city attorneys and has gone through our school district attorneys as well. 2 of the homes we're planning to set aside for first responders in the city. One, we anticipate this, it'll be up to the city, but we anticipate one for a firefighter and one for a police officer. And I think you'll hear from Chief Dura that those agencies are in a parallel situation to nurses and teachers in terms of being able to get professionals to come to our city and be able to find someplace where they can live. So we're pretty enthusiastic about this. We've already broken ground on it, and we expect construction of utilities and the homes themselves to commence here in just the next couple of weeks. And like I say, be ready in September. As far as a recruiting tool, this next school year is when it will be really advantageous to us. But in the meantime, we'll be able to place some folks in there and start taking a small bite out of the broader issue, and hopefully be kind of a proof of concept for how the city might partner with local organizations to take a bigger bite out of things in the long term. Questions?
Questions? Demand, you said earlier, you said replace nurse with teacher, and you've got it. Are you saying your demand is the same?
Great question. Yes, in many respects, data on demand would be hard. If we were to poll our current teachers and say, "Hey, how many of you would like to get out of what you're paying for right now into something less expensive?" The questions would be, where, what does it look like, et cetera. In terms of demand, we have very low turnover, I think I mentioned, compared to the rest of Arizona. Chino Valley regularly turns over 30% to 35% of their staff each year. We were at 13% turnover this year, so we're very lucky that way. That said, we hire about 30 new certified staff every year. Some of them are folks that, oh my gosh, yep, we bought that property in Chino 5 years ago. We've been looking to move up there and build. Here's our opportunity. Or actually, my mom lives there, and so we're going to live with her for the first several months while we find something. We don't have a need. But of those 30 folks a year, we could probably use like this short-term landing place housing. We could probably use as many as 15 right away. Longer term, what would be useful? We have 460 employees, none of whom get paid very well. Most of them currently have a home that they've been able to find a way to work for them. My family moved here in 1983, so we're okay, right? But most of our folks did move here in 1983, so we could use as many as 200 units, I'm sure, that are lower cost housing for future employees who come in and work for us.
May I? So Clark, can we use that number, 200? And do you guys have any stats in your whole staff? The stat would be people that actually own a home and the renters, just so we could get.
Yeah, great question. We do not have that data. I can easily pull up, and I have, and I'll share with you if you're interested, the percent of our staff who live in Prescott versus who live in a surrounding community. But that's not one of the things that we ask is, how are you at teaching? By the way, are you renting or do you own?
Yeah, okay. Just interested, but if we can use 200 as just a rough number.
Ballpark. I'm ballparking
Ballpark.
because, again, we have 460 staff, and we
Yeah.
have about 30 turnover each year, like I say. Ballparking. If there were that many units available at a reduced market rate, we could make use of those.
So let me ask a couple more things. Were you part of the figuring out the lease contracts, and who handled those? And did you alter a standard lease in some way because we've been talking about some of the requirements that would have to be required from the participants in this program?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So our lease is still in development. We're working with our district lawyer, district's attorney, as well as RentRight Properties here in town. Like the hospital, again, kind of just insert teacher, we're not experts in property management. So we decided, hey, we're going to need to contract this out. Part of the rent that we do bring in will need to go to that. So we went out for bids for that, and RentRight said, we'll do it for free.
Yeah, I remember that. I thought
Yeah.
that was great.
We love what you're doing. This is terrific. This is what we do. It won't cost us that much extra to bring you on as a client. And we want to see good teachers come to our town so that they can support the kids of doctors and construction workers and, whoever it happens to be. So they're doing it for free, at least for the first year. And then going forward, we'll see after that. But as far as the lease itself, Connie, to answer your question, that's still in development. I've been the kind of running point on that as far as our school district representation is concerned. So if you've got specific questions, I can get with you now or later.
So will you be adding some requirements to the lease? Or, because we do have a boilerplate typical lease agreement that's out there. Many people use it. But in this particular situation where we want to try to control that, will there be items or amendments to the lease that would, allow just the type of person that we're looking for to, and that's another question, who does decide? Is it a pecking order? I mean, first come, first served? How does that question happen? And then lastly, you can answer those, but lastly, do you know how much the bottom line cost of these units were roughly?
Yeah, roughly, we're looking about $1.5 million all told, bringing in utilities, the homes themselves, foundations, the landscaping, development of the property, et cetera, for 6 of them. Yeah, so roughly a $250,000 each in initial costs.
Right.
I'm trying to remember all of your other great questions that you asked. As far as the lease, yes, there are specific stipulations that are specific to that being on school district property. People can't smoke, for instance, at all. We're going to limit, what kind of pets they could have. Alcohol consumption would be limited in a specific way. Possession of firearms other than law enforcement is illegal on school campuses, as well as tobacco, so et cetera, et cetera. There'll be a number of things that are required by state statute for use and possession on school district property that would, of course, apply to the homes that are on school district property.
And so then would it be first come, first serve, or how would you guys decide that?
Great question. We have a crack HR director at our school district. And so, yeah, as we recruit each year, the idea is that we'll have 4 of these available each year. We're looking at 1-year leases for folks. And so in the summer, the folks who've been here and have hopefully found some place to land permanently will be moving out. And as we recruit new people, we'll use this as a recruiting tool. This will be part of our advertising. Hey, we only pay $51,000, but for your first year, we can, that type of thing, as far as housing. And as people express interest, we'll put them on a list. So the first 4 people on the list will be the first 4 certified folks on the list. Again, our classified folks, we generally draw from people who are here locally already. And we're not looking to move folks, kind of up the housing food chain, so to speak. As far as that's concerned, we're looking primarily to recruit folks so that we can retain them.
Yeah, okay. And what was your estimated completion date? You said September, possibly?
Contractors are always very optimistic about this.
I know.
Yeah, we've been told anything from July 31st to September 1st. We'll see how that goes.
Okay, and I hate to be the only one asking, but one last question. Did that 1.4 include the hardscaping also? That was
Yes.
everything done?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
everything. Yeah, good questions. Anything else?
Mike, I have a question.
Yeah, John?
Yeah. Thanks, Clark.
Sure. Of course.
So looking back at that workforce housing concepts kind of presentation, Chelsea, you sent us, there was kind of a little bubble in one of those charts of a potential concept or idea, which was utility and infrastructure install. One of the neatest things as being part of this project, honestly, is the fact on how the city and the school district worked so well and harmoniously with each other, really, to make this kind of come out of the ground pretty fast, I would say. I guess my question would be, there was an IGA, right? My understanding is that the intergovernmental agreement is between, for the fact being that there's a school district involved, a public entity, and
It's in development right now, and we'll go to the council here in just a few weeks.
Got it. Okay. And so my question would be, utilities, the city was bringing in utilities to this project. There had to be some, special attention to the value given and whatnot for a police officer and firefighter, which I think all that went really well. But my question, I guess, to the city would be, can an IGA or the contents of an IGA, say, for example, in this teacher village, Taylor Hicks Teacher Village project, could be mirrored in also a development agreement? Similarly, right? Like, meaning here's infrastructure being extended, but instead of an IGA, we're looking at a development agreement.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's more of a legal question, but having worked with DAs before, that is absolutely something that would go into a development agreement, and this would be a type of project that could benefit from that. So, yes, the IGA was the best vehicle for the agreement because we're both governmental entities, but DA with a private stakeholder or a non-governmental stakeholder within the city limits, DAs are limited to inside city limits. So if we were looking at property that wasn't, we would have to find a different means for that.
Okay. Thank you.
I have one.
Yes, sir.
You said 1.4. How'd you guys come up with that?
When you say 1.4, you're talking about 1.4 million total.
Right.
So we've got a list of what the contractors bid at to bring the homes in. We've looked at the estimated costs from the city of bringing in utilities and estimated cost of landscaping and whatnot, and added it all up, and that's how we got that
How
figure.
did you generate the revenue? How did you generate the 1.4?
Oh, great question. So $500,000, once again, is coming from a grant and won't be paid. Well, it's bringing money that we've all paid to the federal government back into our community that way. The other roughly 1 million, 0.9 million to million or so, depending on the total outcome, is coming from a fund that cannot be paid. I should have mentioned this. I appreciate you asking. Can't be. So let me back up just really briefly. There's about 42 different funds that we have in the school district, and the government tells us, the state government tells us how we can spend each one of them. This could be used for that, but not this. It can be used for these three things. Don't even think about using it for that, et cetera. One of the funds we have is from the sale of buildings. When we sold our old district office here on Granite Street and Miller Valley Elementary School land, which is now a parking lot for the hospital, several years ago, that went into a fund that can't be used for anything except for building school buildings. So it can't be used for compensating teachers or for buying school buses or for buying new curriculum or anything like that. So it's essentially been sitting in a pot until we build a new school, which is well off into the future. And our thought is, if we've got money now, we have so little money, if there's money now, we should be spending on kids now. And so we looked at, does it make sense in this case? Several years ago it didn't, but when we were told, hey, up to a third or more of this entire project could be paid for out of a grant, we went for the grant. We were fortunate to get it. So a third from the grant, roughly 2/3 from this pot of money that can't be used for other day-to-day operations. Great question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Thank you.
Any questions from the public? All right, thanks, Clark.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Chief, I think you're up.
Right. So I am not quite as prepared with PowerPoint slides, but I think we can cover a lot of the basics here. So first of all, Holger Dura, Fire Chief, I really appreciate the time to address you today. And as the previous presenters have already addressed, and the reason why you're in this room is because we have a significant gap in the ability to adequately house our workforce in this community. And of course, public safety is one of the impacted stakeholders in that. Now, we have a paradox in the fire department, and that paradox is this. We're growing rapidly to keep up with the community's growth. But what makes the Prescott Fire Department special is that we have hometown firefighters protecting their hometown. Now, I could say, which I do need, in the next 5 to 10 years, approximately 70 new people to come into the organization. About 35 of those are going to be new positions with 2 stations coming online and an additional staff to manage our operations. And the other ones are attrition, people that are nearing retirement age. So how do I find 70 firefighters that are hometown firefighters protecting their hometown? That's really the problem that I have. Even if we solved the affordable housing situation, at the end of the day, I still have a culture issue that I've got to solve. Another piece of this is also when we talk about workforce housing for public safety, there's an additional issue. So my previous department was in Boulder, Colorado. Boulder, Colorado has this problem exacerbated a lot. So in Boulder, 3 of the firefighters in a department of around 80 live in the city of Boulder. Boulder has firefighters that commute from Nebraska, that commute from Utah. I know there's a gentleman here on your board that was a firefighter in California. A lot of the firefighters in California commute from Prescott. There are LA County and LA City firefighters that are members of our community because of the scope of this problem. This is a nationwide problem and is going to have much more broad and complex solutions than simply saying we pull this one lever and we fix the issue. It is really a much more comprehensive problem. And let me kind of give you an idea of where some of the challenges have come with workforce housing and public safety. And in Boulder, there was a proposal for affordable housing for firefighters. Now, what that means in the city of Boulder is a condominium, maybe 2 bedrooms, bath, and a small patio. Now, if any of you have firefighters in your family, does that fit the profile of what attracts a firefighter? A firefighter wants 2 acres of land, a 3-car garage, an F-150, and the ability to have a little breathing room. So that's another complication of this situation. One of the things that I've seen here as well as in Boulder is this. The cost of living for a firefighter or a police officer is really, at the end of the day, the key piece of this. So, for instance, if you say, well, we're going to subsidize housing, you still haven't solved the problem of are you adequately compensating in the market competitively with other fire departments? Because even if you have workforce housing that's subsidized, but you're paying a wage that's significantly lower, you're never even going to attract that firefighter in. So basically, what I'm trying to make the point here is that this really multimodal, broad, complex solution to this problem is what's required. So a way that you might be able to do that, for instance, is the city has a responsibility, and they are really serious about it. I got to tell you that as a newer city employee, I'm here to let you know that this city cares about its employees. The cost for benefits, healthcare benefits, is relatively low. So in my own experience, when I transitioned from Boulder to here, my healthcare costs for my family went down. That's one of the ways that you solve this issue. Why? Because now that firefighter or the police officer has more money to spend on housing, right? The other thing I think that you could think about doing is, with the reality of public safety responders and their living lifestyle, right, is to say, what we really need right now in Prescott is a place for folks from outside the area to land, to build connections, to start looking around where they want to live. We just hired a firefighter from California, came from Riverside. He just started the academy about 3-4 weeks ago now. And one of the things that I did is I said, hey, I'm going to make a hiring requirement for you. It's actually a requirement. I want you to come out with your wife, and I want to take you on a tour so you know what you're getting into. Because I didn't want him to show up and have that sticker shock. Now, I'm a smaller enough fire department where I can do that because I don't have 8 applicants from California. I had 1 out of those 8. But what that really taught me was this. It is possible. This gentleman found housing, rental housing, off of Rosser Street. Now, that's a one-time thing, of course. You know, he didn't have to depend on our workforce housing, but the key part of that experience was the conversation in the car was, if we had a place where we could put our roots down for just a little bit, and I can catch my breath with my wife who just had a 3-month-old baby and our 2-year-old, and I don't have to worry right now while I'm going through the fire academy of where are we going to live, how are we going to afford the mortgage, it would make it a lot easier for me. That threshold of anxiety would be reduced for me. I think that is one of the solutions for public safety that would work. If we had a pragmatic idea that we're going to build a neighborhood where a lot of firefighters would live together, I can tell you they already live together at work. They don't want to live together when they're off duty. So those are some things I think that the committee should consider as you go forward. We are 100% engaged with you. We want to collaborate with you. If you want to pilot, if you want to test, if you want surveys, we're here for you. We have a lot of connections with, obviously, our networks in the fire service. For instance, we can send a survey to the American Fire Service and have answers within 2 weeks from every fire department in the country. So if we want to do some market studies, some research, we're absolutely excited to do that. But really the key take-home message today that I want to make sure that I communicate to all of you is this is a complex solution that requires broad solutions. So a single solution will not fix this problem. It'll be a Band-Aid, and the next problem will arise partially because of the effect of that Band-Aid. So, sorry not to bring you tons of solution and just a more complex problem, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to take those now.
Questions? I guess the one that I have is the number of, is 70 your number, or is there some lower number that is going to satisfy the need? Because obviously we're talking about recruitment and retention. I know you have several firefighters here who've been here a long time, so
Yeah.
we're not worried about them so much, but recruiting and retaining is the problem.
Yeah. So retention for us is not as big of a problem as in law enforcement right now. Especially here at Prescott Fire, we have a workforce that's dedicated and loyal to the community and to the department. I'm not saying Prescott Police is not. I'm just talking more that the law enforcement community in general in the country is having a problem with retention because of the stress of the job. I want to make sure that I highlight that. But where that 70 comes from is this. We need 2 fire stations on the north side of Prescott over the next 5 to 10 years. Each one of those requires 15 firefighters each, which includes the staff and coverage positions for vacations, sick calls, and those kind of things. Along with that, we're also planning 1.5 employees for each one of those stations for 40-hour staff for office work, support, logistics. In addition to that, I've got about 35, well, let's call it 30 in the next 5 to 10 years that, because of their defined benefit pension, will be forced to retire. So I need to replace those positions that we already have. So basically 50% of that 70 is new positions to keep up with community growth. 50% of those are just replacing what we currently have. Now, the one thing I do want to highlight here is we're also not just using Plan A to respond to the community's needs and growth. What I mean there is we're doing a better job at prioritizing emergencies. We're putting alternative response vehicles on the road right now in concept, but soon in practice, so that we don't have to just keep putting fire stations everywhere, which are capital and labor intensive. We do, however, because we're so far behind, those 2 stations, we really don't have a choice in terms of ISO ratings and other things. But what I'm trying to basically say is, can I, instead of building 3 fire stations, build 2 and improve response times as much as if I had 3? That's, in essence, a very oversimplified version of what I'm trying to do so that that workforce demand is lessened a little bit.
Thank you.
Kind of a comment more than a question, but maybe a question. What I'm hearing from everybody is a place to land for that first year. They have a place to go. They know that they're secure and they can live there, and while they look around and get their roots. Is that kind of the way you're leaning to? Or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that would be the beginning of a part of the solution. Of course, if after that year that individual still can't find affordable housing, we've still got more of the problem to address. But for the recruitment side of things, and as you heard from YRMC as well as the school district, and I can tell you that's also the case with the police department, and I know the human resources director has run into this as well, it is that initial, oh my gosh, I can't afford it, that we would solve with having a solid, rock-solid, reliable plan. We were actually almost ready with that gentleman from California to talk about the teacher village because we didn't want to lose him. I mean, he's a high-quality individual that I can't wait to have start on our department, and that would have been an option that we would have offered. But yeah, that initial solution, I think, is a really good place to start. So.
Yes.
Good morning, Chief.
Good morning.
I meant to also ask this to Clark, but I'm going to ask you, just to build the background a little bit, at least what I'm thinking. I can't speak for everybody on here, but trying to set these young professionals up for their life, to give them that start. Mm-hmm. At least my idea now was trying to give them the break. Like somebody said, maybe if the starting point would be $1,200 a month, and maybe one of those or something else could, if it was out on the market, would rent for $2,000 a month. Mm-hmm. So by giving them the break, theoretically, that's going to allow them to save some money up for the biggest hurdle is the down payment on a house.
Yeah.
What is the starting wage, just an average for a new firefighter?
So we're currently, and I'm going to look to Brandon, 49, right? I was going to say 48. So $49,000 a year.
That will be going up 6.5% on July 1. So
Right.
I think it's going to be at around 50.
Okay. And do you think a year is enough? If let's just say they could manage to set aside $1,000 a month with a break on a rent, we're talking about $12,000. Mm-hmm. We're looking at probably a 10 to 15% down payment. And I mean, I think that they could probably find something in the $500,000 range.
Sure.
I think we have to look at what the process is to get where we want them to get to.
Yeah.
And with that starting wage, now I know some of these laterals, you'll be compensating them for more. So
Exactly.
basically, maybe the money isn't the issue, it's finding a place. So they need a place to land for a year until they can find something.
Yeah, and in the first 3 years of a firefighter's career, their pay increases significantly as they work through their phase work and,
Sure.
go up a little bit more in tenure. And of course, promotions help. We have a lot of overtime. That's just normal course of business for fire departments. The other piece of this, too, that I want to highlight here is, and this is getting in the weeds a little bit, so I hope you indulge me for a second. We also have a responsibility as a fire department and as a city to educate our firefighters how to utilize the paycheck that they got.
That's right.
We
We've
have
talked about that.
Yeah, we have an issue in public safety particular where
Yeah.
we get young folks that get this job, and then we see an F-150, brand new F-150 parked outside the fire station. I always say to new firefighters, every firefighting class that I've ever hired has said, you have to understand you're currently a millionaire if you want to be. But you have to take action right now at this stage in your career so that you can retire happy and healthy later with better money management, which is something that I feel a department can offer without forcing it on somebody.
That was on my list to talk to you about,
Yeah.
actually, because I've been doing it in an informal way with my son's crew for many years. And, and we talked about that also on the panel, just acclimating them with, these words so they can start to understand. And I know it's hard, especially when they have little children, but if they start getting comfortable with finances, it's going to help teach them. And I think that the police and fire department, and there's many fund managers out there will give of their time for free to start these classes if they so choose to do it. But I do think you're onto something there. We've got to start talking to our young recruits, especially since we now have a change in the PSPRS system where they're going to be responsible for investing some of their funds.
Yeah.
And I think they need to understand the principles behind that. So good point. Well, thank you.
Yeah, mainly I wanted to really say we have responsibility in this too. I don't want to
Yes.
just come in front of your committee and say, fix the problem.
No, but no,
part
I
of the
think
solution.
that's another level of discussion for sure.
Right.
How many did you say that you said 70? We can go off of that just for numbers.
Yeah,
sake?
in the next 5 to 10 years, yes.
Okay,
If-
'cause
if
We're just kind of looking for numbers right
Yeah.
now, just exploratory to see if it's even feasible.
yeah,
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you.
thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone from the public? Chief, thank you so very much. It's very helpful. All right. Someone here from Human Resources, and here he comes.
I'm a handout guy. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brandon Nunez. I'm the HR director for the city of Prescott. I'm here to give you some demographic information on our workforce. I'm going to give you what I think you need to know now. If there's other metrics you want me to track, just let me know and I can look at that. I'm a data freak, so I can get crazy with this stuff. But I'm going to tell you what I think you need to know. I was asked to give you just kind of a baseline of our staff, so that's what I'm here to cover. We currently have 548 full-time budgeted employees at the city. We haven't been 100% staffed in about 4 years, so I wish we had 548 people. Right now, we have 496 employees at the city. I put a little bit in here about our hiring activity because I think that's very relevant to this conversation. We hire 120 full-time employees a year right now, and when people think about the city of Prescott, I don't know if they understand the breadth and the depth of all our services. Most of our positions, 80% of our positions, are frontline service workers. So when you think about the city, you have firefighters, police officers, utility workers, equipment operators, librarians, administrative staff. I mean, most people are on the front line. So we don't have a lot of executives here. I'm one of the only G's in here, so there's a couple people who are highly compensated. We have, you could probably qualify 20 of our employees are highly compensated. The rest fall under $70,000 a year. And I actually have the average salary on here. The average salary at the city of Prescott is $67,000 a year. In our fire department, $71,000 a year, and in our police department, it's also around $71,000 a year. Those populations I sampled are everybody from a chief, below a chief. So I excluded the lieutenants as well. So at the firefighter level, that would be a firefighter, an engineer, and a captain. That's where that wage data came from. The entry, as we already talked about earlier, the entry pay rate for a firefighter is $49,000. When we implement our budget, it'll go up to roughly $52,000 a year. So that gives you a sense of what our employees are making. In terms of our positions in hiring, though, something else that I think is very relevant for everybody to understand is since 2022, this is a metric I've been tracking, and it's pretty daunting, in my opinion, as an HR director, is we've made over 350 job offers, and only 29 of the people we've hired have been from out of the Prescott area. Why do you think that is? They can't move here. Yeah, and so to that point, 18% of our job offers since 2020 have been rejected because of specifically because of the inability to find affordable housing. And I know Mr. Tenney gave some examples. I know Dignity Health gave some examples of that. I literally have dozens of these examples in our department of these conversations. We do a lot of negotiating offers, and we constantly have people reject our offers specifically for housing. So I'll pause there if anybody has any questions on that slide. Okay. In terms of where our employees live on the next page here,
Do you have a slideshow?
I don't. I can pass this out, though, if anybody wants to take a look at it, I can give it to you. In terms of where our employees live, out of all of our employees here, we have 496 employees. Only 211 of them live in Prescott. 137 live in PV, 101 live in Chino, 33 live in Dewey, and then we have another other category where people live all around the state. And to further expand on that point, actually this fall we did a housing survey. We sent it to all city employees to get kind of get our arms around this, what we're dealing with here. In terms of that survey, we had 235 employees participated in that survey. They called out a couple different things here. They said that on average they spend about $1,535 a month on their rent or mortgage, which is kind of shocking. I would think it's higher, but I think that's because similar to the school district, we have a high amount of tenure here. We have people who already live here; they'll never leave. They got hired here 20 years ago, and they'll never leave. That is changing a little bit. So I do think we have a lot of longtime residents within our workforce. Employees said that 53% of their income is spent on housing, and to my point earlier, 43% of employees actually live in Prescott. And I'll talk a little bit more about this survey because there were some call-outs in this that kept me up at night. Amber and I read this survey. There was a lot of qualitative and quantitative data. Some of it was pretty dark. Didn't somebody say that they were living in a cabin in the woods or something, or like a wood shack? It was like a shack. Yeah, a shack. So there were some pretty terrible things being said in here, and this actually opened our eyes, and I think that was one of the genesis for why we started this committee here. So in this survey, 24% of employees said that they currently rent their home or rent the place that they live. Another metric that I want to point out here is, have you had difficulty in finding housing in the Prescott area? That was a question we asked. 77% of people said yes, they have had difficulty finding housing in the area. And the last metric I want to call out here is, does your housing situation present difficulty for your household budgeting or finances? And 62% said yes. So those were some of the questions we asked. It's a 39-page survey. I can route this to you if there is interest, but I think that gives you a good baseline of what we're dealing with here at the city. And I'll take any questions from anybody on where we're at here.
Did you say 26% are renting?
It was, it is 24%.
Thank you.
And if you apply that population, 235 people took that survey at 24%. If you just apply that towards our workforce of 548 potential employees, you're looking at a pretty good sizable amount of a population.
Brandon?
Yep.
May I? Brandon, when you ask a potential employee to relocate here, do you give them a stipend for moving costs?
We typically do that at the manager or director level. We will approach some of those situations with other staff. We have to get an approval from the city manager to do that. That's not a standard practice though, but we'll do it for hard to fill positions.
Okay.
And if we do the math, if we do 120 full-time recruitments a year, and we were to offer everybody $10,000, that's $1.2 million. So it's very costly when you look at the rest of the budget, the whole piece of the pie.
What about enticement? Bonuses?
Yeah,
Anything?
we'll do sign-on bonuses every now and then. In public safety for laterals, we offer some hiring bonuses,
Okay.
typically in the $5,000 range.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So to make sure I understand demand, you're hiring 120 people a year, but some of them, a large portion of them right now are local. So what's your opinion of your demand?
Yeah, I could take a lot of different angles for this. I feel like we will always have hiring activity, just given the current trends for in the American workforce. People change careers at a higher rate than ever. People change careers 5 to 7 times in their lifetime now. By the time somebody's 42 years of age, they will probably have had 10 jobs. So I think the days of us hiring somebody and then 20 years later they retire here at the city of Prescott, I think those days are gone. So I think we will always have turnover. We'll always have hiring activity. So in the context of this, I think we'll always have a demand for people coming here. We're just at a point right now where people can't afford to move here. So right now we're hiring locals because that's the only realistic candidate pool that will take the job.
I know you don't have an exact number, but I want your opinion. What number is that for workforce housing needs for the city of Prescott?
I think, if I were to just take a guess, I would say a quarter of the people that we hire are from outside the area.
Okay.
And then who actually takes the job, that number is way lower.
So just to piggyback off of that, it might help us just to kind of quantify a little bit here. So if the city right now is hiring 120 full-time employees per year, how many of those, in your opinion, Brandon, are, say, having the difficulty of finding housing here in Prescott?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at what the current people said, that 70% of them said they had difficulty. I would imagine that number applies to the people we hire that we're hiring off the street. Because again, this isn't just a recruitment problem; it's a retention problem. Another thing I want to talk about here in this survey, a question that we asked was, would you consider leaving Prescott if offered a job with similar pay in a more affordable community? That number was 60% said yes. So, from a retention standpoint, I think there's opportunity as well.
I also wanted to point out that your monthly average at $1,535 was probably before we saw the interest rates quadruple.
Oh.
So if you have I just wanted to point out for the public that
Definitely.
if you have an employee that has owned a home for a while, most likely they've gotten a percentage rate in the twos, probably 2.4, 2.5, 2.75, whatever. But going in today, you can't even rent anything for $1,500, and I do keep on top of that a lot. And the interest rate to be able to purchase a home, again, what is it today, in the sevens? I know it went down for a moment, but it's back up. So you can imagine what the cost on a $400,000 or $500,000 home would be. The payments are double and a half what they would have been a few years ago. So Just wanted to point that out.
That's a great point. The survey was conducted through August and September of 2022.
Yeah, completely different.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone from the public? Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you.
Clark, can I ask you what the starting wage was for a teacher? I want to put that in my notes.
It depends on how much experience they come to us with, but if somebody comes right out of the box,
51, okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
trying to just beat the fire department. we keep talking about these magical $400,000 and $500,000 homes available. You've got data on that, right? Yeah. There's no such thing.
Nothing. I was thinking Prescott Valley.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so are we going to hear from Amy at some point? And I don't necessarily know that we need a presentation. I think the goal, and I'll defer to the other committee members, our initial goal is just try to get our arms around the demand.
So Amy was not able, Chief Amy Bonney of the police department was not able to be here. She did email a response to the 4 questions that I had itemized. And to answer the initial question from the police department's perspective, and I'll forward this information, the full email to the committee, but they would need approximately 10 to 15 because they have about 10 to 15 of their employees would take advantage of units available now. So for the committee, and Amber and I will work to kind of consolidate all of the data that we've received and get it into more of a like a comprehensive sheet for the committee to keep tabs on. But I imagine it's going to be a living document as these things will fluctuate.
Okay, and then I quickly jotted down, and I shared that with the group. We should probably hear from the sheriff's department because it impacts our community. Yavapai College is a public entity, and then I know it's lower on our priority list, but we have a private need out there, whether it's the contracting community. My biggest concern is the service community in Prescott. So maybe Yavapai College Regional Development Group, I forget their official name,
Right.
but they gather lots of information
They did.
on the economic development of this community. So maybe we can reach out to them and get some feedback or at least a feel of what that demand might be from the private sector also.
Absolutely. I was jotting down notes during the presentations, and we can go over it toward the back end of the agenda, but I have some notes on presenters that could provide additional input for the committee on current housing stats, as well as our wages across the workforce community. And then obviously the update from Mr. Ryan Jones, the economist at Yavapai College, that provided the initial demographic information back in October that I believe we forwarded to the committee, but obviously that was back in October and things have changed.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, I think our scope's getting big anyway, but I chatted with a young gal at ADOT, the vehicle registration. She just moved here, a single mom. She was living on $1,800 a month, working full-time there, so.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Well, I was right. So it kind of makes me think about them as well.
Right.
You know, they serve our public big time.
Right.
Street, roads,
Great
vehicle
point.
registration, so.
What about the restaurant industry?
Connie's comment, what about the restaurant industry? Do they have a local trade association or anything that we
Not that I
could
know
defer
of,
to?
Other than Downtown Partnership, but I don't know if they keep stats,
Right. Well, we can research that.
data.
Okay.
Because we do have a lot of restaurants.
Yeah, well, and part of something we can discuss a little bit later is Deborah's idea of the stakeholder survey. If we can develop a standardized survey of questions that the committee feels could gather the data points, we could send it out to whomever and ask that they send it to their employees and really get good feedback there in using that.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, anything more on this agenda item? Next on the agenda is discussion of goals, mission statement, and timeline.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. We're running a little bit short on time, so I don't want to take a whole lot of time on figuring out if we're happy with the mission statement that was proposed. I'd really like to focus on some of the goals. Now, I appreciate the Courier giving us coverage on the front page a couple of days ago as it relates to the proposed timeline. We were very aggressive when we put that together, recognizing what council feels and the energy of this committee. So wanted to make sure that we were being realistic as well. So I think focusing goals on three major points. Because any one of these, it would be difficult to find three goals inside of it. But if we could, the low-hanging fruit and achievable goals, I feel like we could come up with three from these three categories: a project, a funding financial component like a down payment assistance program, or other programs. Let me see, for instance, like the eligibility, Connie touched on it earlier in the meeting. Education, Chief touched on that, and I know we've discussed that before. So perhaps if the committee could just take a moment and consider, are there is there one concept that we can really pursue over the next 3 months and really flesh out that's achievable in each of these kind of broader goal categories? I've brought to you, it's later on, is it next? Yeah, okay. So I've brought a project concept forward. It's not really a project yet. It's just a piece of land, but it's an opportunity. So the other, the funding, we could look at down payment assistance, and then the program, we could look at the program of eligibility for the city folks and other stakeholders. But what do you all think about that as far as the overall timeline? Do you think 3 goals are achievable in the next 3 months if we dial into some specifics, and then really looking at trying to get a program together and achieve that? So I kind of like to hear some feedback from y'all.
Anyone want to jump in?
Well, I think one of the things we really have to address is the money. I mean, if we're going to draw private industry in, guys like you and I, we have to take a look at how we're going to fund this thing, how we can assist those guys to get this stuff done. It's very expensive to build here.
Yeah.
Because we don't have any flat land except out in the north end. So we really need to address that. We need to talk about, I was reading this booklet that you gave us, what we're allowed to do in the state, where money's allowed to go. And I think one of the things we need to talk about is ways that we can financially assist in development. I got some ideas, but I'd like to do that in a closed-door workshop, tell him first, and then bounce it out to the public later. But
Okay.
I think there's some things we need to talk about on the financial aspect to draw the incentive in to get private industry involved in this.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, and I as far as a project go, I think it's going to be very difficult to achieve specific project goals in that time frame.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't think it's realistic. Funding, we've got guys with the strong mortgage backgrounds here, so funding mechanisms to provide financial assistance to address immediate needs, I think we can look at that, but again, we need private partners to help. It comes down to money. It really does. So that's probably reasonable in that time frame.
Great.
But
Fair.
from a project standpoint, it looks like our demand is easily going to hit 500, and I'm guessing it's between 500 and 1,000.
Yeah.
So with that kind of a demand, this is a challenging. We knew this coming in. That this is going to be a real challenge. It's going to be a high hurdle to cross over. I think we can do it, but it's going to take a long time.
Absolutely. So I'd like to encourage the committee that it's down to 998 with our partnership with the school district. So don't let it be too daunting. But honestly, that may be how we whittle away at that number is a project with a couple units here, a project with a couple units there. So I appreciate the feedback, and what I would propose is that we, Amber and I will work on an email to the committee to figure out exactly just input from you from using the financial and funding focus. And I'd like to, and I'll send this out via email as well, but call your attention in the Arizona Housing Coalition's toolkit resource that we provided you. Chapter 3 is all about affordable housing financing, existing tools, and possible solutions. There are a lot of possibilities in that chapter. So before we meet again in July, I'd appreciate if everybody could just take a look at that and come prepared with some thoughts as to whether we should pursue any of those particular tools, and or if you have additional tools that might not be mentioned, we can set aside time on the next agenda to talk specifically about finance and funding options. But if you don't mind, sir, I would like to just talk about the one piece of land. This parcel that's identified up on the screen. And I believe Amber has some copies if you want. The map is on your at your work location there. This is a vacant parcel that the city owns. It's 0.3 of an acre, and it's zoned multifamily medium. So I spoke with Joe Baines, and again, this is not very fleshed out. I just wanted kind of feedback. I was kicking around Connie's idea as to, coming with a almost shovel-ready project, or at least have a concept that you could go forward to developers with and say, hey, we've identified land, we want to do this. This would be one of those easier builds. It's flat, it's got utilities in the street, it's got gas in the alley, and it's not really encumbered right now. And like I said, the city owns it. It being already zoned multifamily medium, it could accommodate anywhere from 3 to 6 units. And our planning manager, Mr. George Worley, and I were talking about it yesterday, and it may be nice to consider for another type of housing product. The partnership with PUSD, we're offering a single family kind of standalone, really nice manufactured home, but perhaps this lot could accommodate a condo or a townhome or an apartment. We could look at it as the transitional housing that could be used in recruitment. So this is just an example of a piece of land that is available to us. Again, that kind of low-hanging fruit of something that we could do something with. So I'm bringing it forward as just a concept that if this committee would like to learn more, I would think that, number one, I'd ask if there was anyone on the committee that had any kind of, site planning work that would like to be directly involved. But the first step would just honestly take it forward through the pre-application conference process so that city staff could say, yeah, this would comfortably, per zoning regulations, et cetera, this would accommodate, X number of units, and you could do, this with the parking requirements, et cetera. So I'm just kind of bringing this forward as a potential something we could look at to put a dent in that 998 number.
Chelsea, sorry, Connie. What would ownership look like of the land? So that's probably one of the biggest things, is just to throw out feelers out there and see what contractor, what person would be interested in something like this. That's probably the first thing. Is the city looking to sell this property for someone to take it on? Is there more of a partnership between public-private? How far has the city gone with that conversation?
We haven't gone anywhere with the conversation. This was just previously identified as a parcel that, hey, we own this. It's very easy to do because we don't own a whole lot of property. But this was previously identified, and no, we haven't had any kind of conversation. This hasn't been broached with council. So this is just, we're kicking around some ideas together. And really, it would, ownership and the way the plan progresses, I think would depend a lot upon the stakeholders involved. Now, I know Rent Right and the manager for the PUSD offered to do theirs for free, but we can't expect that we'll have those opportunities with operators in the future. Not really sure what land ownership would look like, and whether I know the city doesn't really want to be land lessors, so we would just have to look at that. And honestly, this committee would be the perfect ones that could explore those options, and with obviously legal's help, come up with a plan that would be considered by council. I would appreciate the input of this committee to say whether this is viable. Should we look at it? What avenues should we look at for putting a project here? And then eventually, council would be the deciding factor. But giving them what they need to make the decision, it really kind of starts here.
So I did work for that organization that's across the street there. And a number of years ago, I actually sat down with the city manager and some others to talk about the need for the kids. And because they're growing and they've been on a wait list, the conversation was looking at the possibility of wrapping that into the existing lease with the Boys and Girls Club. So obviously I'm not there anymore, but my heart is still for the kids of the community, and I would love if we could at least have a conversation with them to see what their future needs still look like.
Sure. No, that's fair.
Chelsea?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to suggest this as a project manager. I think what we need to do is think of this on a large scale to begin with, and then we're going to have to either cut it in half. The first thing we need to do is have a private meeting with the stakeholders, come to them with numbers, like I just did that quick math on that, 150 units, get a commitment from them. And if they say, okay, I'm going to commit to this much money this year and this much money next year, then we know what we can reasonably start with. The next person I think that we should bring in here are some realtors with some suggestive properties larger that could accommodate more and get an idea of what's available out there. The next thing, I think we need to probably talk to our attorney about how we structure these contracts, forming LLCs. These people would become, I'm just throwing this out, the silent partners in it, how we divide up, profit or holding costs. Then we need to come up with cost sheets and actually cost everything out. And in this case, just like with those teacherages, we need to identify the land, what the utilities are going to cost, the hardscaping, the product, and get organized that way. And again, if we start with the good and then go into the good, better, best. But I think right now that this initial phase, we do have to think bigger and probably cut it in half to be able to move forward with this, because we're not going to get a huge commitment out of any stakeholder right now until we prove ourselves with the facts, the data, the product, and basically the projects. So we're going to have to structure all that. But I do think it's important to have, whether it's Matt or Joe, start looking into the structure of how we do these contracts. We need release of liability. That's because that's going to be a big one. We need management companies. We need to be realistic about their fees, and thinking this all through to get the buy-in from the stakeholders. And whether or not they're going to be making a profit or not. That's another big consideration. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Connie.
That's a great segue as we talk about the missions and goals of the organization. So I had some questions that I just jotted down this morning and I handed out. So on what is the demand, which we've been addressing for the most of this meeting, and who can compile that information, and provide that to this group. Are we looking at rentals? Are we looking at trying to get people the joy of home ownership, or is it a combination of both? A dedicated person. I've worked with Chelsea for a number of years. I've known Chelsea for a number of years. She is absolutely fabulous, but I hope that you continue as our community development director, which means her time is going to be limited to us. So at some point, we need to bring our recommendations to the city on whether we need a full-time person, a project manager, someone that can help us get this started, get moving towards our objectives, and then in the long term, this is going to have to be, in my opinion, a housing authority or a nonprofit association, a trust or something, to carry all the work we do here into perpetuity to ensure that there's a lot of not of investment of time and treasure, only to see it go away in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever. We're trying to achieve a long-term goal here. Is that a housing authority? Is it a nonprofit organization? Is it a trust? Who is the owner? Who is going to administer this project is a question. As you see, I question, is it scattered throughout the community? Is it one large development of workforce housing, or is it a combination of both? Who qualifies, and how do we determine those qualifications, and who monitors those qualifications? Is it what came up, which was surprising to me at the last meeting, is it physical structures, or is it working on helping them financially through grants or subsidized housing to help them address the housing needs? So I have my thoughts there, but that's something the committee needs to come up with. And then once we have all those answers, if we're going to go to YRMC is a great example, said we're looking to help fund this in a significant way. The first question is, okay, how are you going to do that to make sure our money is spent wisely, as is every single person that is a public, quasi-public, or private entity is going to want to know, how are you going to achieve this, and where's my investment going? So once we have all of those questions answered, then I think we can go out and say, here's how we're going to do it. So I think you had a comment.
Well, I've been thinking about this. I agree with what you're saying, and another sort of way to look at this is that as a city or an entity, let's take a hard look at what we can do, some fees that we can generate, according to this booklet, to help fund this. And then put it out there, this is what we can do for you private builders. This money, this infrastructure, whatever it is that we decide we can take on, that we can provide, and then broadcast a net out there to the developers and the builders and say, this is what we're willing to do. This is going to cut your fees. This is going to cut your costs. City's going to work with you on reducing And then let them come back to us and say, well, it makes sense for sale and ownership, or it makes sense for rental. Let private industry tell us what makes sense to them once we figure out what we can do for them. The fees that we can generate, I have some thoughts on that I don't really want to share right now, but I think there's some things that we can do to help generate a revenue source to help pay for this. Because let's face it, what I'm hearing is we live in a very rich community. A lot of people here have a lot of money. And the people that live here are going to benefit from the workforce that supports them. So bottom line is they got to get involved in paying for it. Whether it's through development or whatever it is, they've got to get involved. They can't get the free ride. We got to have our employees living close proximity to support the people that live here, period. No. And so if we can put together some ideas as a committee that will help the developers curtail some of their costs, and they can see a path toward profitability and deliver the product that we think is appropriate, then I think we have a home run. But let them tell us, because I don't know if rentals work. I'd like to see ownership, because I think when you have pride of ownership, you have a nice neighborhood and it doesn't deteriorate, that kind of thing. but at the same time, let the developers tell us what works.
I want to respond to that real quick. You know, I think we have to operate under the theory that they've got to walk before we run. And I think right now it might be one of the first things that we need to do is decide how this is going to be structured. Because I would love to be able to explore the housing authority. That sounds interesting to me. But our only other option beyond that is a 501 with a profit earning arm to it. You've got to structure it legally in order to be able to entice the investors to come in. Maybe they will agree, and in this case, I would expect them to agree for a much smaller profit. Maybe the profit just covers the management fees. So, because the whole idea is to give everybody a break and working towards home ownership. But, you know, in the spirit of walking before you run, I don't see how we can ask these young teachers to be able to, they just can't graduate from school and come up with the very minimal down payment on a house. So in order to allow them to set aside what is a reasonable rent every month, and again, I'm just throwing this number out there, take 50% of it, and it has to be set aside in an interest-earning account for 1 year to work towards your down payment on what? I don't know. And then you're right. Then the builders have to step up and have a product that they can move into. And it's you know, if it can't all be just located in one spot, we're going to have to do this on a multifaceted, you know, this is a good start, this one lot here. But if we had to think about how many of these we'd have to do to get to that number. It's not going to happen. It's unrealistic. So I think we need to, first of all, decide how we're going to structure this, maybe 2 different ways, look into the authority, the housing authority. And I don't know if Matt is well-versed on the housing authority, or do we need to get an outside independent person that is well-versed on what it means to have a housing authority, because that is another option to see how that functions. Is that something that is going to be good in this situation? Because remember, when you're managing something like a home that's going to require ongoing maintenance, who pays for that? There's so many things that have to be structured in this, because we don't want to set it up for failure. I think we really need to explore how we're going to set this thing up. And maybe we set up both. Maybe we do the 501 with a profit earning arm to it, in addition to a housing authority, because the numbers are huge. We just can't possibly do it all. But if we structure it right, entice the right people in, allow an arm for investment with a reduced rate of return, you know, as a philanthropy thing, so it's just enough to cover the maintenance of it, cut our risks. I know that's not always easy to do, but if we clearly structure this, we will be able to get some buy-in from outside developers, builders, but it's got to be structured very clearly, I think, because of the liability spread. So I would say we start with that first thing, and then bring in some realtors and identify some larger properties and see, you know, again, cost it all out and see if that's where we want to go. And the stakeholders are important. Get a buy-in from them, get a number, a hard number, because we're going to have to work on that hard number. It can't be a theory. It's got to be a hard number once they can see the structure. So just my thoughts.
And I would concur. I think how it is structured is critical. We've got to walk before we run. But in that line of thought, also, we don't want to be reinventing the wheel. Chief Durock already said Boulders has addressed the problem. It sounds like to some extent. I know Telluride has been working on workforce housing for quite some time. Aspen, I understand, has. So there is examples out there that we could probably defer to and say, okay, what programs were successful? What was it a housing authority? What was it a charitable organization that was established? How did you guys do it successfully?
So, yes, there are a lot of success stories. And what's great, and I apologize for going back so many times to the Arizona Housing Coalition, but the toolkit in Chapter 4 mentions strategies, and inside that, there are many other organizational tools that municipalities can use. One of them, for instance, community land trusts. And what's great about the toolkit is it's specific to Arizona. So it's really important that, you know, with our statutory requirements, it's good to look at the state and what's been successful in the state. But there are, examples from Avondale. There's examples. There's also a community development corporation. So there's a lot of different organizational tools in the toolkit. And in addition to the finance chapter, I'd encourage the committee to read the chapter on the different tools that are available from an organizational standpoint. So I did take notes. I'm going to look at one of the realtors that we have sitting on the committee to ask whether or not you're capable or have the time to put together some information regarding some supply as it relates to land available for this particular purpose for the next meeting. Is that a potential?
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay.
I don't have a problem with that.
And
Have you guys spoke with Cody? Because I know Cody's been very involved as well on
absolutely. Yeah.
just even prematurely, even before presentations or whatnot. I've been more in the construction field than I have been truly in the market of real estate generally. So I would probably advise to start there first.
Fabulous.
She's done such pretty good work already.
Yeah.
And she has the baseline of it.
She does,
I'd say
yeah.
check there first. Yeah.
I had put a note down for the next meeting that I'm just going to ask her to really update the information she had previously provided in October, because you're right, she's got it kind of ready to go. And her husband is the managing partner or owner of the Rent Right management company. So he would have a lot of really good information as it relates to the management of leased units. So we'll talk next time about the supply. We'll look to see if we can get some land identified. And then we'll talk about legal structures, and definitely going to look at what's available and the success stories in the state, and then look at potentially public-private partnership contracts, and what we can do kind of moving forward from there.
Chelsea,
Yes.
I'm just wondering, one of the contributors to the Arizona Housing Coalition is the Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona.
Yes.
So as we're looking at different types of infrastructure, how we want to be set up, perhaps they would be willing to come and talk about what they've been doing, because I know they've been in the Flagstaff area doing quite a bit from a nonprofit standpoint.
Yes, thank you. And I actually got Devonna McLaughlin, who's their director. I have her contact information, and I was going to suggest, and thank you for bringing it up, that we reach out to them because of their successful partnership with Flagstaff. I don't know if I'll go ahead and reach out to her and just kind of tickle her about the fact that we have a committee. Maybe she can put something together for next time. Maybe it'll be the time after that, but absolutely really good resource. And perhaps them being the Northern Arizona, Housing Solutions, maybe they'd be willing to expand their services in Prescott.
And Chelsea, add on that list, I had an interesting meeting along with the mayor and a few other people with Goodwill, the Goodwill Corporation.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of money, and they are looking for participants in their program. So that would be, and I've got the guy's name, Joe Abba, I think it is. I'll give it to you.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you. Ready to move on?
Yes, sir.
So just a couple things to comment, just so I chime in here, and maybe even just propose, since we're trying to kind of generate what we're trying to hammer out next agenda. But I think it's clear to me that the demand's evident. I think as a committee, we know there's huge demand. To me, it's two-pronged. It's short-term, temporary. How can we land here and give the good folks of the fire department a chance to settle and set some roots into the community and give them some breathing room? And then the second one is long-term, right? So my mind goes to, we're looking at a short-term rental type product for let's just get people here recruited and retained. And then we're looking still, and maybe I misunderstood you, Chelsea, that we're not necessarily getting rid of these, I think in our packet, the short-term and long-term goals. I think we still need to focus as a committee in the long-term goals. That's where all the biggest need is. And even back to Mike's first point in the first meeting was, we're constantly going to be fighting the market in doing that. So we have to look beyond just this short-term rental solution and go to what does home ownership look like in Prescott for the next 10 years when we have 1,000 units that we need to not only bring out of the ground, but preserve, right, for long-term, for perpetuity. So That's the way my brain thinks. So I'm thinking right now, if we can, Mike, probably for the next meeting, I'd also like to know, like, so we know the demands here. What are the resources? So we're talking about low-hanging fruit for what is available in a project. What is the low-hanging fruit and resources that we have at our disposal as a committee that we can look at? Like, for example, this was awesome, right? In the first presentation we got, a lot of great ideas here, would just love more information. What does a bed tax allocation look like? What does that mean? How can we utilize it? Concepts of, like we talked about earlier, utility and infrastructure. Where is the city? Is there low-hanging fruit parts where the city says it would make sense to extend infrastructure here? What are the resources financially? Are we looking at grants? So maybe a focus on saying to every stakeholder that has showed up today, which I'm kicking myself for because I had it written down, I still didn't ask it, was what grant opportunities are out there for a fire service, for a police department, and start kind of gathering these resources before we start conceptualizing what the structures might be or what the projects might look like. And so that would give us, I think, a firm footing on trying to understand the demand's obvious. It's short-term, long-term. The projects will come. I'm sure that part we can piece together. It's going to be what resources are available to us now, short-term and long-term, which can get pretty complicated, obviously. And I think we're all up for the fight to do it. So that's what I would propose, Mike, for next agenda is to do, maybe get some clarity, Chelsea, like on this sheet here on the concepts that have been kind of tossed around, thrown around for, gosh, I mean, George has been here a while and he's been talking about workforce housing for some time or something. So I would let me just make sure I have that in here. And then, and then the city would probably be the best resource to tell the committee what low-hanging projects, partners, developers, builders, landowners have come to the table in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Maybe having a list of knowing what those folks, who those folks are that have said, hey, this is my resource. I have land. Beyond that, I don't know anything else. I need to piece this together with whoever, but I'm willing to have a conversation about it. I'm sure in pre-app meetings, you have had numerous people come out with just great ideas for utilizing, maybe at that point it was just in the private industry for market-driven housing, but it might make sense now to approach them as a committee now. So those two things, if we can, Mike, just some clarity on that for next agenda, and then a list of potential low-hanging partners and groups, I think would be awesome.
Yeah, I would suggest that maybe the three of us, the chair, the co-chair, and Chelsea, we sit down maybe in the next week or so and develop the agenda so we can start focusing on some of these things. We've had a lot of general conversations. Time to bring it in and focus on some specific issues.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And John, you identified there are a ton of concepts, and to go through them all at the next meeting, it's just not possible. So we'll dial it in together, and we got to start somewhere, right? Sure. And we can start with grant opportunities. Again, lots of things in this toolkit resource that's in your binders. I would encourage you to do that. Mike McGinnis with our CDBG, he's our CDBG administrator. He's looking at the home program through the feds. There's money available there too. So we're exploring things. Let's just dial in as to what we want to do first.
Yep, good. We are past time. We need to adjourn unless somebody else has something pressing. I need to call it.
Yes, sir. I just had a couple of quick announcements. Wanted to make sure that you are all invited and encouraged to attend the council session on the 13th about the IGA with PUSD. Wanted to remind the committee that we don't have any budgeted monies available specific for this committee, but if there is something that we need to explore, let me know, and I'd be happy to ask the city manager if there's budgeted monies available elsewhere. I'll be emailing the committee. There's an Arizona Housing Coalition Forum in August. It's down in the Valley, August 23rd through the 25th. I'm going to be sending Mr. Mike McGinnis with CDBG, but they'll be talking about the home program. Good networking opportunity revolving around this issue. So I'll send more on that later. And apart from that, I think that's all I had, sir.
One last thing. I know we need to go. Chelsea, one of the things I just wanted to point out to everybody, the way we structure this is going to also be, if we don't structure it right, we're not going to be able to take those grants. So we need to make sure that we structure this right in order to attract those grants. Thank you.
John had something.
John, did you have one last thing?
Nope, I'm
Okay.
good, Mike, thanks.
Okay. Everybody's okay? We're adjourned. Thank you.